Hi, you've clicked onto today's tropical tidbit for Friday, October 10th. The thoughts expressed in this video are mine alone, and in making decisions, please always consult the National Hurricane Center and National Weather Service, not me. Well, it's a big day in the tropics, and even though the Atlantic has been mostly quiet this season, this is one of the more active periods that we've seen here in October. And the big elephant in the room right now is this low to the north of the Lesser Antilles, and the National Hurricane Center is actually going to initiate advisories on this as Subtropical Depression 7 at 11 a.m. I'm recording this at 10:30, so I don't have the track out for you yet, but we expect it to be something along the lines of near or east of Bermuda and recurving out. You see this old front here right next to Bermuda. This will likely approach that frontal boundary asymptotically and recurve out to sea. Now, regardless of track, whether it moves directly over Bermuda or slightly east, it won't really matter, because being a subtropical storm, a lot of the heavy weather is really far away from the center of circulation anyway, which you can see actually is exposed, does not have thunderstorms over it, most of them to the north and west of the center. So Bermuda expected to get heavy weather, heavy rain, gusty winds from this regardless of track. The good news is that a large sprawling subtropical storm in October like this isn't really going to transition to fully tropical, and it will not have time to, and so won't strengthen that much, but tropical storm-like conditions are certainly possible for Bermuda as this thing moves out, but Bermuda will be the only landmass threatened by this particular system. Elsewhere in the Atlantic, we actually have a couple more areas to watch, and one of them is this really sneaky monsoonal gyre that we talked about. All the models have really dropped any signs of development here. The GFS being errant, showing a hurricane in the Gulf before, now does not show anything. But you know, the piece that went out into the Eastern Pacific, we may see this develop over here, but you got to keep an eye on what's left behind. You still see rotation here near the coast of Nicaragua, and that is going to very slowly drift northwest. And remember, we have a big trough coming into the south next week, and that can act to draw systems like this to the north and start drawing moisture up into the southern Gulf, Bay of Campeche, northwest Caribbean. So, you know, we still may get something to sneak in here and try to develop either in the Gulf of Honduras or the southern Gulf of Mexico next week. But right now, not an imminent threat. Again, just heavy rains for Central America is the main concern. But if something tries to get going down here, just have a wary eye out for this area next week. Now, finally, we're going to have Subtropical Depression 7 here, but look at this little feature behind it, and this is now becoming an item of interest because the European model has been jumping all over this the last two runs in a row, developing a hurricane into the Bahamas out of this, and that's obviously raising some eyebrows. That's more than a week down the road, as it will take its time moving west. But what we have is you've got this system moving out, and we have a nice big ridge to the east. And what this does is the fact that this system is here means that there's almost no trade winds to the west of this system, but there's lots of wind coming into it from the east. So that means the air tends to pile up. That means convergence, and that air gets forced to rise, and that can really help get this little system going as it comes west. But the pattern is very complicated right now, and there's some reasons for that. We're going to take a look. This is the European out to day 2, 500 millibar height in color, and the contours are mean sea level pressure. Here's our subtropical storm moving up toward Bermuda. Here's the little system behind it. Now, watch what happens as this system lifts out. You're going to have this ridge build in behind it. So by the time we get out to day 4, we see this giant ridge show up where our subtropical storm used to be, and you see the nice surface ridge over New England or southeast of New England as well. So here's our system to the south of that ridge. Now, what this big ridge building in behind our subtropical storm does is it acts to push this little system behind it toward the Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas, and the European eventually develops this into a hurricane in this area here. Now watch what happens if we just look at the 500 millibar for a minute and the anomalies in color. We see to day 4, here's the European big trough coming into the south. And if we go out to day 6, note that it cuts off into this bowling ball low. We have this ridge building in over the top. And when it cuts off like this, that means it's moving very slowly because it's separated from the westerlies. So by the time we get out to day 6, this trough is still meandering over the southeast United States. And here's our storm into the Bahamas. Now compare that to the GFS for the same valid time. Instead of having the bowling ball trough over the Tennessee Valley, we have it already racing off toward the northeast over New England. Now this is a big difference, and this is a huge model fight for a day 6 forecast, and the reason for this is in part due to the 2 typhoons that we've had recurving into the Western Pacific, really sending a lot of waves downstream, and that's really messing up the model forecasts right now because there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of short wavelengths, and this is going to determine how far west this storm can get, because if the European is right and this trough is slower, this ridge to its east will allow this storm to actually impact the Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas. But if the GFS is right, this trough comes in much quicker and the system has a chance to recurve without affecting the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos, but could threaten Bermuda again for the second time ahead of that subtropical storm. So there are some details there. However, if we look at the general pattern, the fact that we have a trough, no matter what form it's in, coming into the southeast US, and the fact that the time of year, it's October, it is almost impossible. I say almost because you can never really know with the weather, but it is nearly impossible to get a storm to hit the United States from the southeast during the month of October. It just really does not happen. All chances favor this recurving east of the United States in some form or another. It doesn't matter whether this trough is slow or fast, it's going to find a way out to sea. The question is whether it affects the Bahamas and Turks and Caicos first. And obviously whether it develops much in the first place. Right now the European's really the only model jumping onto this. The GFS does develop this a little bit coming west, and so do a couple of other models, but we're talking about 7-8 days in the future before this could be potentially affecting any land areas significantly, and this is just something to keep an eye on if you live in the Greater Antilles and the Turks and Caicos and Bahamas during the next few days. This might be coming your way in some form in several days. And Bermuda will have to watch the subtropical storm. So that's about what we're looking at for the Atlantic. But we're not done yet with the tropics. We've got more things to look at. Out here in the Pacific, this is the MJO showing up in green colors here, the velocity potential anomaly, indicating upward motion moving across the Pacific. And this whole area here of the tropics generally showing the upward phase of the MJO, and that's going to be helping our systems that we're watching in the Atlantic, but it's also going to be incubating the Central Pacific. And if we look at the GFS ensemble mean, sea level pressure anomaly out to day 2 here, note what we have. We have a nice subtropical high off of California, and we have very low pressures in the tropics due to the MJO helping out with convection, and we've got several areas brewing down there. So what happens is when you have this nice ridge up here, it really forces convergence toward this low pressure, and it incubates this area. In other words, it's helping disturbances to develop and emerge out of this convective pattern to the southeast of Hawaii. And what happens is the MJO, being the MJO, tends to move toward the east. So by the time several days go by, it moves off to the east, and what was low pressure here ends up reversing and becoming higher pressure than normal as the MJO leaves the area to the east by day 7. But note that we have a big front coming down from one of these Gulf of Alaska storms, and all these typhoons recurving out here out of the Western Pacific means that we get all these lows here. You get this big front to come down, and now if anything was incubating south of Hawaii, you have a chance to move it north toward Hawaii itself ahead of this front here. And this is something that is not concrete, but it's the kind of pattern that when you see this going on and then you see a big front coming down later, you have to ask yourself whether something will be coming up from the south during that time. And the models aren't showing anything really definitive right now, but it might be something where you see the lower pressure on the ensemble mean coming north, and we might actually get some late season impacts to the Hawaiian Islands from the tropics. It could just be in the form of heavy rain with no storm, or there could be some kind of depression trying to develop here. It's really hard to say, but that is the general pattern, showing the stuff forming to the south under the protection of a ridge to the north, and then later something comes down to try to draw it north. Something to keep an eye on in Hawaii for next week. No imminent threats, though. We'll just keep an eye on that pattern. And finally, if we get to the Western Pacific here, just quickly mention Typhoon Vongfong, another big typhoon recurving into Japan. They just had Typhoon Fanfone come up through the Tokyo port, and now we have this coming up east of Okinawa, up the island chain and into the Japanese mainland over the next few days. This is currently probably Cat 3. I don't think they've actually downgraded it from Cat 4 yet, but it will be a Cat 3 when it moves near Okinawa. But it's a very large system. Okinawa already getting wind gusts over typhoon force, and this will be a long day for this island chain and for the mainland. Certainly a nasty typhoon for them. And again, these recurving typhoons, Fanfone and now Vongfong, just throwing wave activity, wave dispersion downstream. It does this to the Rossby waves, lots of short wavelengths coming into North America, and that's part of the reason why we have such a big model fight over the Atlantic and the pattern this complex. It's really kind of a forecasting nightmare, but that's what these typhoons do. It's actually quite interesting. And last but not least, we have a tropical storm, a hurricane, or their equivalent of a hurricane. They just call it a cyclone in the Bay of Bengal here east of India. Here it is, centered right here. The sun going down on it this morning, and it's moving toward the Indian coastline. Was originally forecasted to become a Category 3 or Category 4 cyclone, but has really been struggling. You can see this area of lack of convection to the north of the storm. We have environmental air getting pulled into the core because the core has no protection to the north of it. This is the eye, a very ragged eye wall now, if you can even call that an eye wall. You see that it's a barren north side, and we've seen this now with a lot of storms this year, where you have Fanfone and the early stages of Vongfong both had this, where the core was exposed on one side to the environment, and now we see Hudhud here. A lot of these two-syllable names, it's kind of funny, but Cyclone Hudhud is exposed to the north of its core, and that's allowing this environmental air to keep it in check, and so far has not strengthened beyond the equivalent of a Category 1 hurricane. So that is good news for India, but this may still have a chance to strengthen a little bit before it moves toward the coast, and that will be of impact to eastern India as well. So that's about it for the tropics. A very busy day, as I said, long video, but lots going on. We've got a subtropical storm going to impact Bermuda. We've got this wave behind it. We need to keep an eye on it. If you're in the islands and the Turks and Caicos and Bahamas, whenever the European actually shows a storm, it's worth paying attention, because the European is one of our best models and is not usually overexcited the way the GFS and Canadian are. So it's worth paying attention to if the European catches on to it. Again, keep an eye out for anything sneaky coming out of the monsoonal circulation next week. We have got several areas to watch in the Atlantic, probably the most we've had to watch simultaneously all season, but we've got plenty of time to watch all of them. None of them should be a surprise to us. And then out in the Central Pacific, Hawaii may need to keep an eye on the general tropical pattern out there next week as well. So lots of action, lots of things to watch, and we'll continue to get you updated as the days go by. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.